Are you a photographer who loves traveling around? Are you a video editor who needs to get work done on the go? Do you ever wish that there was a laptop catered for your lifestyle and workflow without breaking the bank? Well, I think that Illegear might just have something for you with the Illegear Arte. You guys know me, I love my thin and light traveling machines, especially ones that are super capable and don't skimp out on much, and that is exactly why I am super excited with this laptop right here. And I'm also super excited to tell you guys why with my deep dive review into the Illegear Arte. So, specs first. The Arte comes with an Intel Core i7-11370H, which is a 35W Tiger Lake H35 processor with 4 cores and 8 threads, capable of going up to 4.8 GHz, built on Intel's 10nm SuperFin process. We also have a 96EU Intel Iris Xe graphics in here, which should help in productivity work as well as light gaming, and the variant that I have with me comes with 32GB of DDR4 3200 RAM together with a Samsung 512GB NVMe SSD. You also get an Intel AX201 wireless chip and a rather standout 14-inch 16x10 2880x1800 100% sRGB 90Hz IPS display, which is an aspect ratio that is great for content creation, and a 54Wh battery. The machine is super small and light at just 1.08 kilograms and sizes in at 309mm wide, 213mm deep and 19mm at its highest above the table, 16mm excluding the feet. The power brick weighs in at 520 grams, is made by FSP, delivers 90 watts and uses a barrel charging plug. The Arte's magnesium alloy chassis doesn't quite have the same kind of rigidity and premium hand feel as aircraft grade aluminum, but nevertheless it feels very sturdy and solid in the hands, in fact the most solid Illegear laptop that I've handled so far. The only form of Illegear branding is on the lid of the laptop, and to the ports on the right, the barrel charging port, a full-sized HDMI 2.0 port, a Type-A USB 3.15 Gbps port, and a Type-C Thunderbolt 4 port. On the left, a Type-C USB 3.1 10 Gbps port which supports DisplayPort Out, a Type-A USB 3.15 Gbps port, and a full-sized SD card slot, and a 3.5mm headphone and microphone jack. Yes, let that sink in. So many thin and light laptops today have gotten rid of that 3.5mm audio jack, let alone provide a full-sized SD card slot. You have no idea how happy this makes someone like me who is a photographer and content creator with a DSLR. Illegear with this laptop has managed to stick both of them in here, and so those other brands that omit them, you know who you are. You only get a head shake of disappointment from me. The exhaust vents are in between the display and the main body, and over on the bottom, 2 speakers on the left and the right, huge intake vents down on the center, and 7 screws holding the back in place. With the lid off, we can see the 2 heat pipes and 2 fans to cool the 11370H and the Intel Iris Xe GPU, and also 2 RAM DIMM slots in case you ever need to upgrade in the future, 1 PCIe 4.0 M.2 SSD slot on the right, 1 PCIe 3.0 M.2 slot on the left, and the Wi-Fi chip, making it one of the more expandable and well-cooled 14-inch laptops that I've ever looked at, which is a kudos from me. The Arte has no problems passing the one-handed opening test with a hinge that is smooth yet decently firm, and that 14-inch 16x10 display with very minimal bezels and super sharp 2880x1800 resolution is the first thing that we are greeted with when opening the laptop. It honestly looks gorgeous with its vibrant yet accurate colors and brightness that can get up to about 400 nits, and it looks super smooth as well with its 90Hz refresh rate. The only real bezel is on the top of the laptop, which is fine as it houses the webcam and has a privacy light that comes on when it's in use. And the webcam is quite alright. As you can see, there's still some blown highlights to my left here, which means the dynamic range of this camera isn't all that great, which is kind of to be expected on a webcam. My face looks a little bit red, I think, and the audio quality sounds a little bit muffled, I think. But overall, it should be a perfectly fine webcam for video conferencing in this day and age of work from home. Getting into the keyboard now, I have given Illegear a hard time before on their laptops' keyboards being pretty terrible, but this really makes up for it. The Illegear Arte has one of the best keyboards on a laptop that I've used and tested, and I have tested machines that cost well over 20,000 ringgit. It's still not really a MacBook when it comes to the typing experience, but trust me when I say that it really does come quite close. The top function keys give you things like adjusting the keyboard backlighting and fan profiles, though there isn't one to disable the camera outright, which I would have liked. Right below the keyboard is a huge glass trackpad that is about 131mm wide and 81mm deep, uses Microsoft Precision Touch drivers, and is pretty nice to use with a really smooth surface and satisfying tactile clicks. You can also double tap the top left corner to lock it, which is a very definitive feature of Tongfang laptops, which it most certainly is. We move on to the software department, and as for pre-installed software, first up, the Arte comes with the Illegear Command Center that seems to have functionality not designed for this laptop, but that aside is a much more modern looking software suite that can do a myriad of things like set the performance levels, configure battery and charging, configure display colors, keyboard backlighting, and system info readouts. There is also the Intel Graphics Command Center for all sorts of Intel Xe GPU configuration with things like screen recording and power saving options, the Realtek Audio Console, the Intel Thunderbolt Control Center, and the THX Spatial Audio for PCs. Before we get into the benchmarks, let's talk a little bit about the power profiles on the Arte. Normal Intel spec states that the PL1 limit of the 11370H is about 28 to 35 watts, with a boost most commonly around 65 watts, but the Arte takes that Intel spec and stomps all over it. It has a PL1 limit of 65 watts and a PL2 limit of 93 watts, way above the limit. This boost in wattage can be seen in Cinebench R20, where the 11370H in the Arte scored 2627, where normally it would score about 2200. Despite the 65 watt PL1 limit, however, the Arte only hits about 47 watts before it's thermal limited and runs at just 40 watts long term. Still, it gets quite close to the 6-core 12-thread 9750H running at 60 watts, and as for the single-core numbers, it absolutely trounces it at 582 points. In the Blender BMW render test, the 11370H finished at 6 minutes and 20 seconds. It comes behind the 6-core 12-thread 10750H at 45 watts, so it still won't be able to beat something that has more cores and threads. Running the Cinebench R23 10-minute throttle test, we can clearly see the 11370H ramping up to try and hit that PL2 limit initially, but being instantly thermal throttled, forgets that idea, tries to go down to its PL1 limit, but even then, it's still thermal throttling at 95 Celsius with a core clock speed of 4 GHz and a power level hovering around the 38 watt mark. Things took a turn the moment I tried to run some gaming benchmarks. Despite having a better and faster CPU and technically the same GPU, the Arte actually lost out to the Intel NUC M15 in both CPU and GPU scores in 3D Mark TimeSpy. This trend continued into Rainbow Six Siege, where it was definitely slower than the Intel NUC M15 with an average FPS of 55, a 1% of 45 and a 0.1% low of 43, which made it more than 10 FPS slower despite running 50 MHz higher on the GPU and at much lower temperatures. The same happened in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, where it also lost out to the Intel NUC M15 with an average FPS of 31, a 1% of 23 and a 0.1% low of 15. This is again all while running cooler than the Intel NUC M15. My best guess is that this has something to do with the memory in the Intel NUC M15 running at 4266 MHz while the Arte runs at 3200. As the Iris Xe GPU does not have dedicated memory of its own, it uses a portion of normal system memory as video memory, and with the Arte having slower RAM, it should affect the performance of the Iris Xe inside. I am of course curious to know if this also affects the encoding speed in DaVinci Resolve, and so I exported one of my older videos as a benchmark. The results were unfortunately in line with the gaming results. Overall encoding times on the Arte was slower than on the Intel NUC M15 due to that huge disparity in RAM speed, most likely, with software encoding coming in slower at 7 minutes and 57 seconds and QuickSync video encoding being substantially slower at 6 minutes and 43 seconds, clearly showing its dependency on fast RAM for performance. Just a little bit of a disappointment then. Closing off the benchmarks is the storage performance, and the Samsung PCI Express 4.0 NVMe SSD in here pulled a sequential read of 5370 MB per second and a write of 3770 MB per second, which is absolutely nothing to scoff at. During those benchmarks, as expected of a dual fan dual heat pipe solution in a machine like this, the WASD area never quite exceeded 37 Celsius, while the hottest spots I measured around the keyboard right above it managed to hit about 45 Celsius. Noise levels though weren't too bad. It's audible, it's not quite annoying, and I think that's all that counts, as a machine like this definitely has to work harder to dissipate its heat. The speakers on the laptop weren't too bad. They're obviously not going to have a lot of bass, but they make up for it by being decently loud and crisp. Plus, I'm not exactly expecting a laptop like this to be a bass powerhouse anyway. Battery life is a section where I found myself really wanting more on this laptop. Perhaps it's a combination of the screen and the processor, but the Arte only managed to pull 4 hours and 30 minutes in my battery life workload of just writing this script on it and listening to music, which is pretty darn sad if you ask me. Charging it back up took 2 hours, and I gotta say that I am really missing that over 12-hour battery life on the original Ionic machines that I looked at. Yeah, those were amazing. Right, so I think that brings us to the conclusions on the Illegear Arte. I really do wish that we could have gotten better battery life with this laptop, even if it meant going down to something like a 1920 by 1200 display, and perhaps the performance disparity between this and the NUC M15 can be closed or matched by fitting some much faster 4266 RAM into the Arte, but in the end, those are just my wishes. Just like the Ionic Touch that I looked at before, this laptop sits in a similar price category, starting out at about 4,600 ringgit, which is about 1,090 US dollars, with the configuration that I have here costing about 5,500 ringgit or 1,290 US dollars. Again, you have the other offerings that I mentioned before in my past Ionic Touch video, but if you're only looking within Illegear's offering, you have to make a choice. To me, the Ionic Touch feels like a machine better suited for video editors and creators, with its larger touchscreen display, overall better performance even in video encoding, and a longer battery life. The Arte, on the other hand, is much smaller and more compact, lighter, has a nicer, higher resolution 16:10 display and a larger trackpad, a full-sized SD card reader, and honestly, the best keyboard that I've used on an Illegear laptop. I'd say it's more suited to the traveling photographer who is also processing photos from his camera and can benefit from that display and SD card reader. Whichever you choose then is up to your needs. But if you ultimately settled on the Arte, I'd say that it's one of the nicest machines Illegear has ever made with an awesome typing experience. So yeah, I do recommend it. That's the end of the review. I'll leave any links that I have in the description if you're interested in checking it out. As usual, like if you liked it, if you found it useful, then share it. If you have something to say, comment down below. And if you like my videos and want to see more, well, then subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified for any future videos. My name is Yang, the Tech Rodent, and I'm still waiting for Illegear to release that true Ionic 15 successor. I really love that laptop, man. I'll see you guys in the next video.